What's up, everybody? It's Chicago talk show host, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking about St. John Chrysostom's Adversus Judaeos. So, got it, and I printed it out, and I spent most of last week reading it. It's a pretty short read, and I do recommend you read all of it. So, what I'm going to do is, from the start, I'm going to discuss and quote various passages that I found pretty interesting and share them with you. I'm not sure if you ever heard of St. John Chrysostom or his homilies called Adversus Judaeos. I became privy to St. John Chrysostom after reading the works of E. Michael Jones. I have a whole playlist dedicated to his literature that I've read and have done book reviews, so I encourage you to check that out. And I also encourage you again to get this document and read it for yourself in its entirety, because these are just highlights, my personal highlights of what I've read and what I wanted to share in this initial video. And but it's an incomplete understanding, okay? So it's for you to find the material yourself, read it for yourself, and draw your own conclusions. So that being said, we're going to get started. So St. John Chrysostom, he opens up with this idea to kind of reiterate how unfathomable it is to understand God and his ways. All right? So we'll start off with this first quote here. This is from Homily 1, St. John Chrysostom. He writes, "And Paul saw this small part as a vast and incomprehensible sea when he exclaimed, quote, 'Oh, the depths of the riches and of the wisdom and of the knowledge of God. How incomprehensible are his judgments, and how unsearchable his ways.'" Quote, "God's nature is more than our minds can grasp." And I think that's a great way to start off this series of homilies, because a lot of people like to think that they kind of have an idea of what God is planning, or how things are going according to this world, and it's all manner of dynamics, and they kind of like to think or even plan what's going to be happening. But does anybody really know? I don't think so. I don't think anybody really knows, and that's okay that nobody can fully grasp God's plan for me, God's plans for you, God's plan for the history of humanity itself. And so that can be unnerving, because we want answers, right? We want to be able to explain everything. We want to be able to have a sort of solution and a sort of greatly laid out explanation for all these complicated things that are a part of life, right? But oftentimes we just can't, and we don't know, right? And so this is where the idea of faith comes in, right? This idea of, those who have ears to listen, those, let them listen, right? And, so the information is out there. The signs are out there. But we do have free will, as far as, it's up to you if you want to take heed to the word, right? All right, so for the second little passage or theme that I kind of want to bring up it revolves around this bit. St. John Chrysostom, he writes, quote, "For if the enemies of the truth never have enough of blaspheming our benefactor, we must be all the more tireless in praising the God of all." So, that deeply resonated with me, because it's true. I mean, we see, when was the last time you saw a Hollywood movie mocking Muhammad, mocking Buddha, mocking, whatever pagan god, lowercase g? It's the movies that I've seen around Hollywood, when they do poke fun at religion, it's always making fun of Jesus Christ. And that's a reminder that he will not be mocked. And so this idea that Satan and all his works constantly employing all kinds of people to serve him and just blaspheme the Lord, I can agree with the idea of that those who practice the faith should be that much more vociferous in spreading the gospel and separating truth from lies. Moving on, the third passage I'd like to bring up that really stood out to me. It's a little bit long, so let's get started. St. John Chrysostom, he writes, "Nothing is more miserable than those people who never failed to attack their own salvation. When there was need to observe the law, they trampled it under foot. Now that the law has ceased to bind, they obstinately strive to observe it. What could be more pitiable that those who provoke God not only by transgressing the law, but also by keeping it? On this account, Stephen said, quote, 'You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart, you always resist the Holy Spirit,' end quote. Not only by transgressing the law, but also by wishing to observe it at the wrong time." St. John Chrysostom continues, "Stephen was right in calling them stiff-necked, for they failed to take up the yoke of Christ, although it was sweet and had nothing about it which was either burdensome or oppressive. For he said, quote, 'Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart,' end quote. And, quote, 'Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is sweet and my burden light,' end quote. Nonetheless, they failed to take up the yoke because of the stiffness of their necks. Not only did they fail to take it up, but they broke it and destroyed it. For Jeremiah said, quote, 'Long ago you broke your yoke and burst your bonds,' end quote. It was not Paul who said this, but the voice of the prophet speaking loud and clear. When he spoke of the yoke and the bonds, he meant the symbols of rule, because the Jews rejected the rule of Christ when they said, quote, 'We have no king but Caesar,' end quote. St. John Chrysostom writes, quote, 'You Jews broke the yoke. You burst the bonds. You cast yourselves out of the kingdom of heaven, and you made yourselves subject to the rule of men. Please consider with me how accurately the prophet hinted that their hearts were uncontrolled. He did not say, quote, 'You set aside the yoke,' but, quote, 'You broke the yoke,' end quote. And this is the crime of untamed beasts who are uncontrolled and reject rule." So, pretty spicy. You know, I read something like that, and first of all, I found out about, again, St. John Chrysostom by reading E. Michael Jones, his work, and I had no idea that there were such powerful champions of the Catholic faith. There's so much I have to learn in this world, right? And when I read stuff like this, I mean, I'm almost floored, right? Because this kind of stuff, you can barely talk about it. It just floors me because, for one, what I love about the way St. John Chrysostom outlines his ideas in his writing is he emphasizes these key details and nuances of some of these things that are said, right? So when he's making that kind of distinction about that, hey, this guy didn't say you set aside the yoke, but he hammers the point that you broke the yoke. I mean, that's a critical difference, right? The magnitude of something like that is extremely powerful, and it speaks volumes of the subject at hand. I mean, wow. All right, so since things are already spicy, we're going to keep it up and keep it spicy. St. John Chrysostom, he writes, "When brute animals feed from a full manger, they grow plump and become more obstinate and hard to hold in check. They endure neither the yoke, the reins, nor the hand of the charioteer. Just so the Jewish people were driven by their drunkenness and plumpness to the ultimate evil. They kicked about, they failed to accept the yoke of Christ, nor did they pull the plow of his teaching. Another prophet hinted at this when he said, Israel is as obstinate as a stubborn heifer, end quote. And still another called the Jews, quote, an untamed calf, end quote. But St. John Chrysostom continues. He writes, although such beasts are unfit for work, they are fit for killing. And this is what happens to the Jews. While they were making themselves unfit for work, they grew fit for slaughter. This is why Christ said, quote, but as for these my enemies, who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slay them, end quote. You know, so when I read a passage like that, I think about, I'm in the middle of reading The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit by E. Michael Jones, and I think about those first, like that first opening chapter about, I think it had to do about Rome and the history of like the Jews in Rome and all kinds of bloodshed, right? Especially with the first and second temple and what's his name, Bar Kokhba and all manner of bloodshed, right? And it makes me think about that. This sort of consequence of violence directed at them. And I don't know, but that's what it makes me think of. So we're going to go to our next point. This should be point number 5 that I found interesting in this passage. St. John Chrysostom, he writes, many I know respect the Jews and think that their present way of life is a venerable one. This is why I hasten to uproot and tear out this deadly opinion. I said that the synagogue is no better than a theater, and I bring forward a prophet as my witness. Surely the Jews are not more deserving of belief than their prophets. Quote, you had a harlot's brow. You became shameless before all, end quote. Where a harlot has set herself up, that place is a brothel. But the synagogue is not only a brothel and a theater, it is also a den of robbers and a lodging for wild beasts. Jeremiah said, quote, your house has become for me the den of a hyena, end quote. He does not simply say, quote, of wild beast, end quote, but, quote, of a filthy wild beast, end quote. And again, quote, I have abandoned my house. I have cast off my inheritance, end quote. But when God forsakes a people, what hope of salvation is left? When God forsakes a place, that place becomes the dwelling of demons. So we're almost done with that bit, but we're going to keep going. St. John Chrysostom, he continues. I'm going to skip a little bit, and he says, quote, if then the Jews failed to know the Father, if they crucified the Son, if they thrust off the help of the Spirit, who should not make bold to declare plainly that the synagogue is a dwelling of demons. God is not worshipped there. Heaven forbid. From now on, it remains a place of idolatry. But still, some people pay it honor as a holy place. So, I've been to a synagogue before. Yep. So, I was doing some freelance work a few years ago, and I had to do some video shooting for a political thing in Chicago, and I went to a synagogue for the first time in my life because I had to, because that's where the work was, and I had to catch some video footage, right? And, you know, so I go to Catholic church, and so needless to say that they're different is an understatement, but I'm not trying to point out the obvious. Rather, what I'm trying to say is, as a Catholic going into a synagogue for work, and I enter the building, and what stood out to me is I didn't feel a Holy Spirit. There was a vacuum. There was there's nothing. It's the word soulless comes to mind. This isn't a knock, all right? I'm just giving you my impressions, all right? I remember walking in there, and my Catholic church, of course, was surrounded by images of like the Passion, right? Jesus, the cross, right? Mother Mary, and when I went to the synagogue, there was obviously none of that. Instead, there were men. There were portraits, fine portraits, really good portraits of men in business suits, expensive 3-piece business suits, appearing to wanting to look dignified. And there were several of them. I remember seeing them, and I was just like, is this like a corporate hallway of like former CEOs of a business or something? Like, that was interesting to me. Again, this was a work function, right? There was some business going on for the city of Chicago. We might as well just be in some sort of convention center, holding some sort of a business meeting. I mean, they did some songs. Some organizers of that event did some sort of singing, and I remember listening to the songs. And the songs, you ever listen to like different frequencies of music, like I was watching this video about like tuning in certain frequencies, and how there can be subtle differences, right? Just seemed that way. I heard them singing about holy things, but I didn't feel the Holy Spirit, right? It's kind of weird to explain. It's like they were singing holy words, but there was no life in the words. Take that for what you will. Right. All right, this one is going to bring up the spice level again. St. John Chrysostom, he writes, "The Jews frighten you as if you were little children, and you do not see it. Many wicked slaves show frightening and ridiculous masks. To youngsters, the masks are not frightening by their nature, but they seem so to the children's simple-minded, and in this way they stir up many a laugh. This is the way the Jews frighten the simpler-minded Christians with the bugbears and hobgoblins of their shrines. Yet, how could their ridiculous and disgraceful synagogues frighten you? Are they not the shrines of men who have been rejected, dishonored, and condemned? Our churches are not like that. They are truly frightening and filled with fear. God's presence makes a place frightening because he has a power over life and death. In our churches, we hear countless homilies on eternal punishments, on rivers of fire, on the venomous worm, on bonds that cannot be burst, or exterior darkness. But the Jews neither know nor dream of these things. They live for their bellies. They gape for the things of this world. Their condition is not better than that of pigs or goats because of their wanton ways and excessive gluttony. They know but one thing: to fill their bellies and be drunk, to get all cut and bruised, to be hurt and wounded while fighting for their favorite charioteers." So when I read something like that, one of the first things that comes to mind is, as I look at my internet, Proverbs 1:7, quote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction," end quote. That's what I think of. It's such a trip, right? We're in 2024. I mean, this was written in Autumn 386 CE. Wow, what a trip that these words still resonate right now, in this day and age. I don't know. You think about it. You think about it. You let me know. All right, this is going to be the last passage I'm going to point out. If you're still with me so far, thank you very much for watching. I always appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel to stay tuned for the next video I'll be coming up with on the same subject. And without further ado, this is the last passage for today. St. John Chrysostom, he writes, "Tell me then, are there shrines awful and frightening? Who would say so? What reasons do we have for thinking that they are frightening, unless someone should tell us that dishonored slaves, who have no right to speak and who have been driven from their master's home, should frighten us, who have been given honor and the freedom to speak? Certainly this is not the case. Inns are not more august than royal places. Indeed, the synagogue is less deserving of honor than any inn. It is not merely a lodging place for robbers and cheats, but also for demons. This is true not only of the synagogues, but also of the souls of the Jews, as I shall try to prove at the end of my homily." You know, so that was again pretty spicy. And this whole video is pretty spicy. Let's just be honest. But you know, reading something like that, I can't help but think that St. John Chrysostom seems to be suggesting a sort of, especially that last part, some sort of, I made a little note here in my paper. He seems to suggest this idea of a level of inherent, dare I say, demonic possession, or some sort of a innate predisposition to demonic influence. I don't know. It's wild. It's wild, right? But this is the kind of vibe I'm getting. But again, the point of all this is for I wanted to share this in case you've heard. I don't know if you've heard of it. If you were to ask me in my 20s, you asked me, you know, if I ever heard of St. John Chrysostom, I would have told you no. So there you go. Again, this is from Adversus Judaeos by St. John Chrysostom. Look it up. You can download it. It's a short read. I highly encourage that you do. And you let me know what you think, and you draw your own conclusions. So thank you very much again for watching. It's been a Chicago Talk Show host. Make sure you like, subscribe the video. I'm on X, so make sure you keep up with me there. I put a lot of channel updates there. And again, do me a favor and watch the whole video. Listen to it on your car ride home, and let me know what you think. Thanks. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.